Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Yeah, that's In the Navy, my friends, from the Village People. I'm Jake Novak filling in for Steve Moore this Saturday afternoon. And why am I playing In the Navy? Let's pot it up just for a second. Here we go. Yeah, I'm playing that because right now the U.S. Navy is showing Iran who's boss. Just at this hour, finishing up right now, a number of U.S. destroyers transiting the Strait of Hormuz untouched, unattacked, despite Iranian threats, just showing the world, and more importantly, the Iranians, you have no power here, Gandalf the Grey. No, they have no power. And that's important. And hopefully we shall see a corresponding response in the price of oil when the price of oil trading continues, or resumes, I should say, in the futures markets, 6 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow night. That would be interesting to see a further decline in oil prices now that the United States has shown that Iran can't even try to mess with the U.S. Navy there, and they'll do it again if they need to transit it again. I would, if I were Secretary Hegseth, President Trump right now, I'd order a daily transit of U.S. destroyers through the Strait. So that's really the breaking news right now. That is your major international story. Yeah, the peace talks are going on in Islamabad, but they can talk all they want. Action speaks louder than words, and that's an important story, and it's an important financial story. And again, I'm Jake Novak filling in for Stephen Moore, and I want to talk about, in this first segment, 3 major breaking stories, really at the international, national, and then I would say major urban level, local level in the United States. And all 3 of them you might think aren't really right for an economic show, aren't really right for finance. I want to talk about my 401k. I want to talk about IRA. Okay. But you need to understand that the economy and money are living things. I'm not saying they're sentient beings, but they're living things, like a plant, like the climate. How many times have you heard people on the left and some people all over the political spectrum talk about the environment and the climate as it's a living thing? Well, it kind of is. I'll give them that. And they've convinced everyone in the world that everything that we do affects the climate. Again, maybe that's true, maybe it doesn't. I'm not a big believer in mankind being able to do totally great things or totally bad things to the actual climate. I think that we can pollute the atmosphere with real pollutants, not carbon dioxide. We can do that. We can make our oceans filthy. We can not pick up garbage across the way. We can do all kinds of things like that. That's true. Whether we can change the overall temperatures in any significant way as human, I'm not sure that's true. But it is a living thing. I do take that. I do agree with that. And the economy, money is a living thing too. Economy, value, capital, they are living things. And things that we do in the world affect it one way or the other. So it's not hard to guess how this top breaking story right now is affecting the economy or could affect the economy. The fact that we've had 2, 3, 4 naval ships go through the Strait of Hormuz, U.S. naval ships go through the Strait of Hormuz untouched despite Iranian threats, should have an effect on oil prices when that trading resumes tomorrow night at 6 p.m. That's not a stretch. That's just a hard, cold fact. Of course, it's been the bottling up of the Strait of Hormuz, the dangers in the Strait of Hormuz that have pushed up oil prices in the first place. Now, I'm going to do the second breaking story, which I think is, I guess you could call it a developing story. I've been in television news and radio news for over 30 years, and I understand you as a viewer or a listener getting tired of people saying something is breaking news 6 days after it breaks. I get it. So it's at least a developing story. But for many of you, this still might be a breaking story. And you might think, how is this connected to money, Jake? I'm going to tell you how. This second story being this stunning development in the state of California with Congressman Eric Swalwell now being accused in a very coordinated, sophisticated announcement or series of announcements of sexual misconduct, including one rape accusation, at least one, against Congressman Swalwell. Now, what does this have to do with my money, Jake? What's going on here? Well, this was this guy right now, talking to you right now. I'm Jake Novak. I told you several weeks ago on many of these channels where you listen to this show, on my own program on Saturday and Sunday mornings, I told you that there was a massive amount of money being raised within the Democratic Party to try to get some of the Democrats who are running for governor in California, along with Eric Swalwell, to drop out of the race. There were too many Democrats in the race. And because of that, in several of the polls, not all of them, but in several of the polls, 2 Republicans are leading in the jungle primary. And the way it works in California in those jungle primaries is the top 2 finishers in the primaries for their statewide elections, including federal elections like for Congress, which are not statewide for the House of Representatives, but for the Senate and things like that, they run in the actual general election in November. So if you got 2 Democrats who come in 1-2, which is what's been happening in so many of their primaries, then those 2 Democrats run off against each other in November. That's the way it works. California loves this because the Democrats so heavily outnumber Republicans on Election Day. Some of that might be due to election and vote inflation. I'm going to just say it that way. Others would say fraud, ballot harvesting, et cetera, whatever it is. And they love it. But they're not loving it now because there are so many Democrats running and just a couple of Republicans that in a number of the polls, including the latest poll that was finished up on April 7th, 2 Republicans are leading. Now, this would be a disaster. Unmitigated disaster for the Democrats, it would be, if they don't get at least one candidate in the November general election for governor. Gavin Newsom, the current governor, is term limited out. He can't run again. It would be an incredible embarrassment. Right now, leading in all the polls, just marginally, though, is Steve Hilton. He just got a huge endorsement from President Trump. But even before all these Eric Swalwell allegations came to light, and this is not a chicken and the egg story, by the way. Several weeks ago, I reported, and a number of other people did eventually later after that the Democrats were raising a lot of money, pooling a lot of money to try to whittle down that number of Democrats in the jungle primary. So presumably some Democrat, and a lot of people thought it would be Eric Swalwell, would be the beneficiary of this. Some of the bottom feeders of the poll who are getting 4 and 5% would drop out. Presumably they would go to other Democrats. Eric Swalwell, who kept coming in third in most of the polls, would presumably get into the either first or second position based on that. That's what we all assumed, that the money was going to be used to pay off some of these bottom feeders to get out. It doesn't look like that's what happened right now. It looks more like that money was pooled to take these accusations that have been out there against Eric Swalwell for some time, but never as detailed, never as dramatically presented as they have been now. And boy, was yesterday's revelations and really Thursday going into Friday revelations, accusations against Swalwell. That was an incredibly coordinated effort. I've been in the news media for a long time, folks. Don't tell me that this was organic. Okay, these kinds of accusations, this kind of banner story, the San Francisco Chronicle leading the way on this story, or at least leading the way to getting fed this story. I've seen this many times. Again, you have to remember who you're talking to. I was an executive producer in TV news for over 30 years, also an editorial columnist, radio host now, all those kinds of things. I know how this works. This was a coordinated effort by media contacts, PR firms, probably well strategically planned out. Law firms, the law firms heavily involved in this. And of course, political operatives as well, all involved in this. And that takes money. That takes money. Here's where you get the money aspect of this. And it's a tremendous signal to anyone who ever might want to run for office. And I don't know if Eric Swalwell is guilty or innocent of these charges. I had some friend of mine from the D.C. area get angry at me today saying, why are you talking about this and not all the Republicans who sometimes get accused of sexual assault stuff? And I told him, I'm not really reporting on the sexual assault stuff. I don't know if it's true or not. So I'm not reporting on that at all. I'm only reporting that the accusations have come out and the timing of it and the real reason for them. The Democratic Party, the DNC, has more power over every Democrat elected from Dawn Katcher on up than they've ever had in my lifetime. The Democrats used to be like herding cats. I used to call them the Democats because they were very, very independent. And sometimes that actually wasn't a bad thing. It was hard to get their ducks in a row as a party. Now the roles have reversed. You've got a lot more people who try to ditch the Republican Party among the elected leaders in the Republican Party more often than the Democrats by far. And that isn't necessarily a criticism. Sometimes that's a good thing. I often say the Republicans sometimes have a little too much democracy. Remember that period a couple of years ago, year and a half ago, where every 5 seconds they wanted to get a new House Speaker? I mean, come on. That's a little too much democracy. I say give them a chance. The Democrats have no democracy. They haven't had a real presidential primary since 2008. And they're doing stuff like this in the California primary. This was a very expensive operation. This was an economic story as much as it is a political story. Don't let anyone tell you different. It was also a story of choice. They could have done what I and a lot of other people expected them to do and paid off 2 or 3 of these people at the bottom of the polls, like Anthony Villaraigosa, the former mayor of LA, who's getting something like 4% in the polls, and gotten him to drop out and endorse Swalwell or something like that. But they decided to go with this, getting Swalwell out of there. The problem is there really aren't a lot of really big name, promising folks to replace Swalwell. I was just talking with Larry Kudlow about this. He just heard his show wrap up after 3 hours. We were just talking about it off the air. I think this helps Steve Hilton and the Republicans more. I think they've made a mistake. Fools and their money are often soon parted, and they may have blown a lot of money on this in the wrong direction. I think they should have done with their money what I said. Now, how does this affect the economy of California? How does this affect those kinds of things? Well, California economically is a very important cog in the American economy. Plain and simple. It's our biggest state population-wise. It's a major tech center, of course. It's a major tourist center, of course. It's a major natural resource center. It's a major agricultural center. And we now have a race for governor where we may actually get a business-oriented person at the top, really for the first time. I know a lot of you are thinking Arnold Schwarzenegger was business-friendly, and he certainly was more business-friendly than any other governor that I can remember. And yeah, we had people like Pete Wilson and Governor Duke Majan, who certainly weren't enemies of business, but they weren't business people. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, while being a tremendous entrepreneur in his own right, was never a CEO or a big leader of a big business. He was the head of Arnold Incorporated, and that was no small thing. But come on, I'm talking about someone who oversees hundreds and thousands of employees and things like that. Would be very interesting, folks, if we get a business savvy leader of America's really biggest economy within the United States. It's still the biggest economy. Texas and Florida coming on real strong. And California's doing all it can with its anti-business leadership to chase those major economic cogs of their state away. You can report on it every single day. Gavin Newsom doing it, before him Jerry Brown, et cetera, et cetera. And even Schwarzenegger, when he was governor, was way too friendly to the municipal unions of that state, particularly the prison guard unions. And yet it's harder to get a prison guard job union, a unionized job in California than to get into Harvard statistically. That's not an exaggeration. That's how good the pay is. That's how hard it is to crack in. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, who wanted to get back into the movie business, which relies on unions big time. Let me tell you something. Arnold Schwarzenegger's not going to do indie movies, right? You know, he wanted to go back and do big action films, which he did. He went back and did some of them. Anyway, he was way too friendly to them, and that hurt business in California. So there you go. These are big business stories right now. That's the biggest international story in Iran, with Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, this big national story, and they both affect the economies of both the individuals here in the United States and our overall national economy. When I come back, I'm going to talk about what you might think is a very local random story, but it too affects you and your money. I'm Jake Novak in for Stephen Moore. Stay with us.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And I'm Jake Novak filling in for the great Steve Moore. I've been talking about some general economic realities connected to the major breaking news just in the last hour or so here in the United States, couple of hours, or developing stories. I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of this economy and the stock markets and everything else like that throughout the rest of the program. Don't worry. But I want to make sure everyone is on board with economic principles and economic realities and how the economy, as the point I was trying to make off the top of the show, just like climate, just like nature, the economy is a living thing. And the things that we do as humans, one way or the other, affect that living thing. I'm not saying it's a sentient being. I'm not saying we pray to money. Don't get me wrong here. Please don't misquote me. But the economy is a living thing. And so when we have U.S. naval ships going through the Strait of Hormuz untouched despite Iranian threats, and that's the breaking news of this hour, That affects the economy. That's an easy one to see because you can see that that could potentially affect oil prices. Hopefully it will drive them down further when trading resumes in the futures market at 6 p.m. Sunday night, right? Then I talked about this Eric Swalwell situation, which was created by money. Again, the accusations against him may be true, maybe not. I have no idea about that. For those of you who think I'm talking about that aspect of the story, you're wrong. I'm not really here to talk about the sexual assault, including one rape accusation against him. Those details you can see elsewhere. If you really want to look at him, you know enough just by what I've told you. But what I do talk about, and what I did just talk about very briefly, was the fact that this was the result of these accusations coming out so coordinated and so strong, has a lot to do with money. Now, the third story. This is just a New York local story right now. Sadly, it's kind of a national story because of the nature of crime in America. But we just had a cop fatally shoot a guy with a machete, a maniac with a machete, who stabbed 3 senior citizens at the Grand Central Station subway stop here in Manhattan. Now, how does this have an economic impact? Because, as you'll hear me say many times, I've been writing about this for years, we've been brought up to believe in the schools and in our churches and synagogues that poverty is a big reason for crime. Poverty is the reason. It's the other way around. Crime causes poverty. There will be a lot of money, and again, our major concern is with the health of those people stabbed, don't get me wrong. But there will be a lot of money not made in and around Grand Central, not only today, but for years because of this incident. Crime causes poverty. And the greatest anti-poverty program in the history of the world has been fair and just law and order. All right. We've set out the principles. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty of the economy here on More Money. I'm Jake Novak filling in for Steve Moore. Going to talk about inflation when we come back.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And I'm Jake Novak filling in for Steve Moore today. Great to be with you on this beautiful Saturday, at least here in the New York area and the Northeast in general. I hope you're having great weather where you are. It's still a little chilly though. So I will not be one of the people going to the Mets game this early evening. Early season baseball is torturesome to me, in person at least. I usually try not to go until May. I can handle brutal cold in a football game any day of the week, any time of year. But cold baseball games, unless you're at the World Series, just doesn't seem worth it to me. But that's just me. Hey, in the first half hour, I got more than just macroeconomic on you guys. I almost went biblical with my big picture, major big picture from 50, 60, a million, 1,000 feet, whatever you want to talk about it, however you want to say it, in my talking about the economy and economic realities. You have these major events going on internationally, nationally, and locally, and they all affect our economy because the economy, just like the climate, as you've been taught since, if you're a younger person right now, millennial or younger, I know you've been taught since nursery school that the climate is a living thing, but some of us who are older, Gen Xers like me, had the Mother Nature stuff drilled into our heads from preschool on. Just like nature, just like the climate, the economy is a living thing. This is not an exaggeration on my part, nor is it an anthropomorphication. I didn't pronounce that right. But the idea of making something that isn't living into something that is living. I'm not doing that. It is living. It is a living thing. I'm not saying it's a sentient being. I'm not saying that we bow down to the god of money or economy. But as we've been talking about the breaking news today of several U.S. naval ships traveling safely through the Strait of Hormuz despite Iranian threats against them, that will affect our economy, most notably in oil prices when we get trading again tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Then you had the Eric Swalwell case, our nation's biggest individual economy as far as an individual state of California. I believe these revelations now about Eric Swalwell, very coordinated with a lot of donor money behind this coordinated effort. And again, I have no idea whether these sexual allegations are true or not. I am not denigrating or questioning the victims or the alleged victims in any way, nor am I really denigrating Eric Swalwell in any way. Not at this point, not on these issues. I'll do that on the other things that I do know about for sure. But I do know also for sure that these were coordinated, financially backed efforts. This took law firms. This took PR firms. This took media contacts, probably a little payola, to get this done so fantastically, so splendidly, so very well done in the way that it was done in a coordinated effort. and they immediately got Pelosi, and they immediately got Adam Schiff to rescind their endorsements for this guy, Eric Swalwell, for governor, and on down the line. Folks, the Democrats are doing this in the hopes of getting Swalwell to drop out, and they think that this will boost some other Democrat, maybe Katie Porter, who's another member of Congress among the Democrats running for governor. Not sure who they're expecting to get the biggest boost from Swalwell dropping out of the race. I actually think that won't work. I think they've actually hurt their entire brand, and I think we are a step closer to a real businessman in Steve Hilton actually becoming the governor of California. A real big-time businessman, not just a pro-business Republican like we've had in the past in some governorships in California. Not recent past, because we've had a lot of governors in a row now, or at least two-termers in a row, 16 years since Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor. But he was pro-business at least most of the time. But we never really had a big CEO type, business owner type, employer of a lot of people type, real estate. We've never had that. And California, I think, is a step closer to that now, and that is the nation's biggest individual by state economy. It still is. Texas and Florida, again, making a big play for that. But that's a big economic story. And then finally, this, there's a lot of horrific crimes in America. I'm just doing the one that's getting the biggest coverage right now. I know I'm being a little geographically biased being a New Yorker, but this stabbing at Grand Central Station, 3 elderly people stabbed with a machete, the cop shooting to death, the stabbing, the machete wielding maniac. Just seeing now that the 3 victims looking like they're in stable condition, that can be not so good either, but at least they're not, it looks like they might make it. Thank goodness. But that's an economic story too, because crime causes poverty. You show me the impoverished nation in the world, the impoverished neighborhood, the impoverished city, and I will tell you the crime that created that poverty. It could be a war in some ways, and many times wars are crimes. It could be just an absolute militia or armed group or mafia group that came in and ruined a town. I'll tell you what it is. It could be drugs. Look at Mexico. Mexico isn't crime ridden because they were poor. Mexico has tremendous natural resources. They're crime ridden because the drug cartels have created a generational poverty problem in that country. And a few other things too. And there are other criminals as well. And colonial criminals of the past as well. Not the United States, but from Spain, and you know who else was. Germany for a while was also running Mexico, if you can believe it. Anyway, folks, that's the big picture stuff. But I want to get into the nitty gritty because I'm not a huge fan of economic reports, government economic reports, and not for the reasons that you might think. You might think, here's another guy, Jake Novak, who's going to have a conspiracy theory about partisan fooling around with economic reports. No, that's not me. I don't really have too much evidence of that. It wouldn't shock me. But I don't really have that much evidence of that. What I do have evidence of the fact is that economies are really difficult to measure. It's kind of like trying to figure out how many gallons of water you have in a swimming pool by putting a ruler in there. It's not going to really give you an idea. It's hard to measure an economy. It is a living thing. And like all living things, there's a lot of metrics, biometrics you need to take before you get an idea of how things go. But as economic reports go, I am kind of a fan, I'm accepting, of our consumer price index. Why? Because the consumer price index is determined. This is what we call the consumer inflation report, or most of us just call it the inflation report. Because it is determined by what is known as a basket of goods. They literally take the average prices from as many parts of the country as they can get for a number of items that people commonly buy. And this latest inflation report that we got yesterday, I thought was fascinating because, first of all, I have almost never seen, because I don't think we did, first of all, I was only about 9 or 10 years old when we had the real gas shock of the late 70s. I was born in 1970, so I didn't go through economic reports as a 9 or 10-year-old. I wasn't that much of a nerd. I did like to go out and play and on my bike and play baseball and football and stuff like that, believe it or not. I was very aware of the inflation. I was very aware of gas prices. I paid attention to that a lot, but I never actually sifted through the CPI as a 9 or 10-year-old. Well, I do it now. And I can't ever remember a CPI report that was so dominated by gasoline prices in my life. Because gasoline prices, while they have gone up, the issue here isn't how much they've gone up to, because we're still well below the record national average for a gallon of regular gasoline. As of today, according to AAA, that number is $4.13. That's the national average right now. Now, that stinks compared to where we were the day before the war, which was at $2.98 for a national average. So we're up $1.15. in less than 2 months. That stinks. I get it. I hate it too. But $4.13 is still 88 cents below the all-time high set during the summer of 2022 under the Joe Biden administration. There wasn't any war in Iran going on at that time. It was even before the October 7th attacks, by the way, when we hit $5.01, 501. That was the national average. That's the all-time high. Now, I like to play around with inflation calculators. There's a couple you can get where you can take a look at something and say, hey, what $1 in 1888, how many dollars would that be today? How much buying power would that get me now? An 1888 $1, and you find out it's like $100, you know, that kind of thing. And then you can also go backwards. So it turns out that $4.13 today is like paying $3.66 in 2022. And $5.01 in 2022 would be like paying $5.66 or something like that now. So we're way below the all-time high in real numbers and also inflation-adjusted numbers. And in the CPI report, we found that gasoline, now the CPI showed, the Consumer Price Index showed a 0.9% increase in inflation for March. That's a big jump for 1 month, okay? But it was almost entirely fueled, no pun intended, by gasoline prices that went up 18.9% in 1 month. That's a big spike. That was almost all of that increase in inflation. Because listen to some of these other numbers. This is fascinating. Used cars and trucks, and that's a big part of our economy in this country. Maybe you never bought a used car, or maybe you did. Maybe you never had a used truck. But you understand, especially used trucks are a big part of the business economy in this country. Plumbers, contractors, people who need to haul stuff, buy a lot of used trucks. All right. Used cars and trucks fell last month by 3.2%. Those prices fell, not sales. Prices fell by 3.2%. That's fascinating to me. Now for the things that everyone's been talking about during this inflation spike since it started under Biden and people tried to continue this narrative under President Trump. Meat, poultry, and eggs. Can you guess where they went last month? If you guessed up, you're wrong. They went down 0.9%. Egg prices in some parts of this country are at all-time lows adjusted for inflation. Down. Dairy prices down 1.6%. That's a big drop too. Does this mean the economy is great? Does this mean everything is great? No, not on those numbers alone, but it gives you an idea of where we are in inflation, with inflation. Gasoline prices are all really giving us all the momentum right now in inflation. That's what's going on. It's gasoline prices, my friends. And if they do come down, and by the way, they are coming down. We were at $4.16 a couple of days ago. I'd love to see it continue to come down, get back down under $4 for our national average. That will help our economy. And meanwhile, even with this very big spike in gasoline prices, we've seen used cars and trucks fall last month, 3.2%. The price of used cars and trucks, big deal right there, by the way. And that has a lot to do with, by the way, EVs. Used EVs are a bargain right now. I'm not a huge fan of EVs, but I do concede that there are a number of parts of this country where getting an EV makes financial sense. Getting a used EV at some of these bargain prices makes even bigger financial sense. And we're seeing these food prices go down. At least they went down in March. That's a nice development, folks. And one that we shouldn't ignore, and why it's worth getting into the nitty-gritty. Now, again, I don't vouch as much for some of the other economic reports. I am a huge critic and skeptic when it comes to the jobs report every month. I think it's an incredibly insane attempt to measure jobs in this country, to have people basically self-report their payrolls. It's just crazy. It's just crazy to me. That's a huge part of it. And sometimes they fudge it. And I've met people who admit that they fudge it because they just don't have time. So I'm not a huge fan of that. And I know the markets move on all these economic reports, and they don't move on them because everyone on Wall Street thinks that they are accurate. They move on them because they're betting on it like a roulette table. They don't necessarily believe the numbers mean anything. They just have a bet in on the number, one way or the other. And they have every right to do that. Go for it. Have a good time with that. But as economic reports go, the CPI is pretty interesting because it's as close to accurate as I can think of any kind of economic report. I really like it. And to me, this was not a scary economic report to me. Gasoline prices, we know they're going to go back down. They always do when supply gets freed up. And that's where we are. All right. I'm Jake Novak in for Stephen Moore. We're going to talk a little bit more coming up next about betting markets. Speaking of people who bet on numbers, big news on that front. We'll be right back.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And I'm Jake Novak filling in for Steve Moore on this beautiful Saturday afternoon. We go from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern time with this show. And this is live. This is live weekend radio programming. And people should listen to live over taped any day of the week. I'm very happy to be part of a live program here. Folks, I want to tell you about some exciting things we have coming up in the next hour. First of all, we're going to be joined by Ann Leibschutz. She's an incredible legal and tech expert. We're going to talk to her live about some amazing stories. But I hope you didn't miss it, folks, but this has been an amazing week technologically and economically for this country and for the world. Don't forget, we just had a moon mission completed safely last night. The splashdown, everything went well, went right on time, too. Talk about prompt. They must have, those German scientists that helped our original space program, their souls are smiling at the promptness, at the very least, of that splashdown yesterday or last evening. So we're going to talk to her about that. She's an amazing person to talk to, a voice you haven't heard enough of. Love. And I was an executive producer in TV news and in news for a long time before I switched to in front of the camera, in front of the mic. And in both of those roles, one of my favorite things in the world has been to bring in new voices, new faces, new people. And she's a great one. Also, in the last half hour of this program, 2:30 or so to 3 p.m., I'm going to take your calls. And remember, the number is 800-848-9222. Want to get your calls on the economy. Tell me about your money thoughts, your concerns, any of the other topics that I've touched on we can talk about. I want to keep it to that financial angle, though. So if you want to talk about the Eric Swalwell thing, for example, can't really get into the nitty-gritty because I don't know what to believe as far as these accusations. But if you want to talk about the money aspect of this and what it would be like if California ends up getting a really pro-business, more than pro-business, an actual business person as its governor as a result of this, that's a great topic. We can talk about other things. So that's what's coming up in the next hour and that last half hour of the show as well. But I want to talk about something else that, again, I think is really interesting because this has been something that the financial markets have been talking about for months now as a potential ethical issue, and now we know it is a potential ethical issue for the entire country, not just the financial markets. I'm talking about these prediction markets like Kalshi and Polymarket. I know there's some others. I don't mean to leave them out. I'm just giving them out there because those are the two biggest names. And I think that those betting sites, some of them have betting sites, some of them are just prediction markets, whatever you want to call them. I think that they do actually have a purpose. It's interesting. You can learn some things from them. They can be manipulated, and I think they've been manipulated, and we're going to talk about that. So for those of you who think, oh, here's this guy going to say we should get rid of them, he's a prude, he's a Puritan. No, I'm not saying we should get rid of them, but I think we need to have better rules about how they're conducted, and that is something that also has a lot to do with how you, as a person, or how businesses or employers keep control over their employees and keep ethics at their company or their organizations in a good place. One of those places is the White House. We just learned yesterday that at the end of March, the White House sent out a detailed email to just about everyone who works at the White House and to some other people in the Trump administration as well, warning them specifically what they shouldn't be doing on these prediction markets. And I'll summarize it for you. They're telling them, don't bet on them. Because remember, these prediction markets don't just have predictions about what's going to happen in a particular economic report or what might happen in a stock. They also have betting opportunities on items in the news, like when the United States would attack Iran. You can understand that if you work at the White House and we find out how you bet on that, that would be a little problematic. Can you get where I'm going with this? Now, last week, Polymarket got really in trouble for the fact that it was allowing people to bet on when the U.S. airman, the crew member that F-15 would be found dead or alive, and they pulled it after a lot of criticism. The biggest criticism came from a Democrat congressman, to his credit, so that's good. I agree with that. You want to pull that kind of ghoulish stuff. You don't want to have dead pools. You want to do that in your private life. And people are going to do stuff like that. Fine, but I don't want to have a legitimate company giving people an opportunity to bet on when somebody famous might die because someone might decide to win the bet by killing them. I'm not kidding. That was a plot of a movie, by the way, with Clint Eastwood, Deadpool. But nevertheless, folks, this stuff can happen. You don't want to have this kind of unethical behavior. Now, the markets have been going on about this for months because they were worried that people in public companies would bet on earnings reports, would bet on corporate announcements. And unlike all the extensive laws we have against insider trading, we didn't have any laws stopping them from going to some of these betting sites. So they couldn't go and sell off their stock or short a stock of their own company when they knew they were going to have a crappy earnings report. That has been regulated for years, and they've done a much better job. The SEC used to have a really tough time enforcing insider trading laws, and it's still a tough prosecution. Ask anyone who's worked in the SEC. It's not the easiest, but it's gotten better now thanks to technology, et cetera, et cetera. But that same person who wouldn't be able to short a stock in, let's say, IBM because he knows they're going to have a bad number, he can go on Polymarket or these other sites and bet on that happening. So this has been an issue in the markets for a long time. They've been complaining about this, but it turns out it's not just a stock market thing anymore. It's not just for breakfast anymore. It's also on major news events. And if you're in the military and you're in one of those bombers about to bomb some country and you can put a bet on Polymarket on when a bombing is going to start, that's a little problematic, don't you think? Just from a financial ethical point of view, but I think an overall morality point of view. So good job by the White House to send out that email. Now, I want to see congressional offices do this, particularly the offices of some of the senators and Congress people who have been complaining about this. Do they have a rule in their office telling their staffers they can't go on Polymarket? I don't know. I'd like to see. All right, we got this packed hour coming up, folks. And Leibschutz is going to join us in about 15, 20 minutes. Going to take your calls in the last half hour. I'm Jake Novak, in for Stephen Moore.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And I'm Jake Novak filling in for Steve Moore on this beautiful, at least in most of the country, Saturday afternoon. I want to get you updated on the breaking news because we're getting more confirmation about the things that you first heard here on many of the stations that carry this program. First with the Larry Kudlow Show, then on my own program, or at least me filling in for Stephen Moore. The U.S. Navy has sent several ships, naval ships, warships through the Strait of Hormuz to try to begin the whole process of creating safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, just getting those ships through it today sent a major message to the world because Iran had threatened to attack those ships if they went through. Not a shot was fired as far as anything we're seeing. And now the commander, CENTCOM, Brad Cooper, just announcing that the United States is indeed establishing a safe passage and a specific route will be shared with the rest of the world. In other words, the exact coordinates, where you should be and the nautical miles, so that you know you've got a safe path through the Strait of Hormuz. I can't wait to see how oil futures are going to respond to this news at 6 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow night. I don't know for sure if they're going to continue to go down. We closed on U.S. crude at $95.63 a barrel Friday. The knee-jerk response in my mind would be we'd see oil go down even further because this will increase supply. We shall see. Yeah, the markets sometimes act a little bit differently than you expect. Sometimes they focus on something other than the headline. But other times, you know, it's better not to get too smart with it and just go with the big number. The big story. We'll see what happens there. At the same time, by the way, we are seeing on those naval trackers, those maritime trackers, I should say, the ones that basically tell us where every tanker is going in the world. We have seen just in the last 24 hours a massive shift towards the Gulf of America. We used to call it the Gulf of Mexico. Because these tankers need oil, and they don't want to go to the Gulf of the Persian Gulf for it if there's any dangers there. And that whole challenge that President Trump gave to the world, hey, help us open the Strait of Hormuz by yourself. Apparently they're not helping, and we're doing it anyway as a favor to the world. But he also said option 2 is buy your oil from us. We've got plenty. And we'll see how that goes. Now, if you think that the world coming to buy their oil from us is going to lower the price, I do have bad news for you there. It's not going to do that because the United States is going to sell at the market price, the world set market price. And then you get some geniuses, some people who think they understand economics who will say, well, just make sure that those American companies that drill oil here can only sell it to America. And so we get lower prices here. Well, folks, if that's the case, they're not going to drill as much. They won't make as much money on it. If you tell someone you have a product here that you've broken your butt to make and to create and to produce, and you can only sell it for this lower price when other people around the world are paying a lot more, they're going to say, forget, well, whatever, I'll go work for my cousin Joe's Cleaners. I mean, what am I going to do? I mean, try to understand economics just for a minute before you make comments like that. And you hear this all the time. It'd be one thing if this were just college students who are a little bit high talking about this in an economics class, but you literally have elected leaders who say this kind of nonsense too. Price controls, we'll stop them. They're making too much money. I'm doing my Bernie Sanders impersonation. By the way, the man's an ignoramus. I know a lot of people who think they don't like him, like, oh, he's a really smart guy. He went to University of Chicago, but I just don't agree with him. He's a crazy communist. No, he's also an ignoramus. I've seen what he writes. I've seen the way he talks. He's not just an economic ignoramus. He's just an ignoramus. Just because someone has messy hair and a New York accent and a Jewish last name doesn't mean you're smart. Believe me, I grew up in the community. They're not all smart. Let's just put it that way. Okay, that's out of the way. Let's talk about something else that I think is really, really fascinating. The other story that I think is really your big national story right away, and we just heard it in the news update from Liz Radabali, these accusations against Eric Swalwell. And I'm like the rest of you folks, unless you know the guy personally, I have no idea whether these allegations are true or not. I am not casting any aspersions on anyone in particular on these allegations. But I do know what I do know, which is how politics and news stories get disseminated. I've been in this business for over 30 years. And you'd be completely blind not to notice how well coordinated, timed, and precise these accusations were when they came out Thursday, going into Friday, and then by late Friday you had Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff rescinding their support for Eric Swalwell. And that kind of campaign, this is an economics show, we call it More Money, that costs money. And it came just a few weeks after I reported, the only broadcast reporter to do this story, by the way, at least the first, but for a long time the only one, to tell you that the Democrats were pooling money for weeks, trying to figure out how to get this jungle primary under control in California for the gubernatorial race that's going on right now. Eric Swalwell was the leading Democrat, but that's a relative term. He wasn't coming in even first or second in any of the primary polls except for one or two, where he came in second. This was a disaster for the Democrats because if these polls hold, it's going to be two Republicans running for governor in November. No Democrat will have a chance. That primary is June 2nd. So this is a financial story for two reasons. One is it took a lot of money here to try to shake up this jungle primary. I thought, like many other people, just if you think I'm tooting my own horn all the time and trying to boost myself, I'm not. Because while I am proud that I was the first and for a long time the only broadcast news guy to tell you about this money pooling effort to fix the Democrat primary among the Democrats, I incorrectly thought that money would be used to pay off some of the bottom feeders in the poll to get them to drop out and endorse Swalwell, the leading Democrat. Well, boy, was I wrong. Because it appears now that money was used to coordinate this effort. Look, folks, Swalwell did have these accusations against him. I'd heard them before. Again, didn't know what to make of them. There are so many allegations like this out against both Republicans and Democrats. There are people who try to keep score, by the way. I feel sorry for them. I don't know if it's more Republicans who get accused of sexual stuff or more Democrats, and I don't care. I only want to see justice done, and we'll see, and the facts coming out. I'm not really interested in that scoreboard. But I can tell you that almost anyone running for office, there is some scintilla of accusation against them about stuff like this. And what it takes is money and amplification of those accusations to get them going. Hey, if they happen to be true, all's the better if you're trying to amplify them. But that doesn't necessarily matter. Ask the people in 2020 who tried to amplify that woman's accusations against Joe Biden. Remember Joe Biden? Maybe you don't even remember because they didn't have as much money to amplify this. But Joe Biden was accused of cornering a woman in a room against the corner of a wall and sexually assaulting her. That didn't go anywhere. outside of Republican and right-wing circles, it didn't have this kind of amplification. This is huge. This takes a lot of money. Law firms were involved. PR firms were involved. Journalists at the San Francisco Chronicle were involved. And it takes money to get all this going. A lot of money. Lunches need to be paid for. PowerPoint presentations need to be paid for. Accusers need to be paid for to get them on a plane, get them in front of a microphone, pay them to miss work. There's a lot of work that goes into this. Now, what's the other financial angle here? California, for better or for worse, remains the biggest individual economy within the United States of America. And while the Democrats may think that trying to take Eric Swalwell down will somehow boost another Democrat to the first or second place in this jungle primary poll, and this jungle primary, which is going to be June 2nd, I don't think so. I think this is going to hurt the Democrats more and put more people on the side of the Republicans vote running in this gubernatorial election to replace Gavin Newsom, who's term limited out of his office right now. And I think the chances now that Steve Hilton, a real businessman, strongly endorsed by President Trump, will now win this race. I think that his chances have been boosted, not hurt by this. I think the Democrats have made a miscalculation with their money. And having a real business person with real business experience, not just a pro-business guy. Hey, we've had Republican governors of California in my lifetime. Ronald Reagan, Steve Deukmejian, Pete Wilson, Arnold Schwarzenegger. They were pro-business, but they weren't really business people. So, hey, we could have some really interesting, we could have a really interesting development in the state of California, which could possibly reverse this economic collapse in the state. I find that very interesting. You should too, as anyone who happens to follow the business of this country. All right. We're going to take a break because when we come back, Ann Leibschutz, who is a legal and most importantly, I think a tech expert, she is a tech expert. And if you like tech and if you like economy and tech-related economy, this has been one of the best weeks in world history, not just U.S. history. We're going to start with that. How's that for a tease? We got a lot more to talk about. This is Jake Novak in for Steve Moore. Stay with us.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And I'm Jake Novak filling in for Steve Moore, and I've got a real treat for you. A really great tech and legal expert, Ann Leibschutz, is joining us now. And let's not ignore the elephant in the room, not only for this interview, Ann, but really for the whole world. And I know I'm not a Pollyanna, and I know you're not either, but these last 7 to 10 days have been an absolute marvel for the world. And in the words of Ferris Bueller, if you don't take the time to stop and smell the roses, you just might miss it. I mean, I think a lot of people miss it. So what really struck you over the last 7 to 10 days, Ann?
You are right. It has definitely been a historic and unprecedented time, and so many things have happened that should make every single American be proud. But let's think about this past week. First, there was, 2 major holidays, Passover and Good Friday and Easter, that have extreme symbolism. The story of the Exodus and the return of Israelites to Israel. And for our Christian friends, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And following these 2 important holidays, the two things happened that were unprecedented and amazing and truly remarkable. First, the rescue of 2 service members behind enemy lines. And this in itself is both a miracle and perfect execution. The U.S. military successfully rescued 2 U.S. service members shot down behind enemy lines when one even had to climb 7,000 feet in order to escape capture. So there's more than one thing going on here. We have our talented and trained service members that were able to use their SEER training, and our highly capable U.S. military that shows once again the might and ability of the U.S. military. So when when critics think that the U.S. has some type of diminished standing, our U.S. military showed what they're able to do. And then the exact same week, we had a historic, textbook, perfect spaceflight mission with the Artemis 2 mission and the return of integrity to Earth safely with 4 healthy astronauts. It was a perfect execution by NASA, and it embodied the mind and spirit of Gene Kranz's tough and competent motto that he put into the NASA culture. And when you stop and think about it, in 1 week time, our U.S. government personnel, our service members, our civilians were able to do the extraordinary in 2 very different cases.
Yeah, Anne, this brings to mind, and again, this is an economic show, this is a finance show, and these 2 stories bring to mind a battle that I've been fighting for years as an executive producer in financial news at CNN, at Fox Business, and at CNBC. And I understand how all those financial news channels love to talk about the tech companies and the latest iPhone and the latest gadget and all that kind of stuff. And I was always pushing them to do more about defense tech because, first of all, it's great video. Television is a visual medium. Hello, McFly. And they wouldn't do it. And then I told them, well, we should do it also because this converges. The high tech sector that you're so hot about all the time is really into defense tech, too. We should do these things. Now, none of the things you just mentioned were possible even just a few years ago. The new technology that was used both in the search and rescue effort and in this moonshot is some of it's relatively new, and it will have a tremendous effect on the markets and in the values of some of the companies that participated in these feats. I have been one of those people who looks at everything that happens whenever there's an armed conflict in the world, and I look to see what's going on with the defense stocks. Now, unfortunately for investors, most of the Israeli defense tech is not publicly traded, not even in Israel. IAI, Israel Aerospace Industries, that IPO has continued to be delayed year after year after year, and I understand why. There are national security issues involved. However, Elbit Systems, which makes everything from night vision goggles to a lot of missile systems and missile defense systems, have you seen their shares lately? I mean, the last couple of years just soaring. So, Ann, talk a little bit about how this has an effect on your 401k possibly, or the financial economy of this country.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And this is the area I work every day. And when you say defense tech, it's also the startups in this country. So it's not just our big prime contractors and our large corporations, but it's the whole ecosystem. It's the whole community of startups and the organizations that support them across the country. The biggest funder of R&D is the U.S. Department of War. It still has the largest external RM budget, and it funds R&D to meet military mission needs and Department of War needs, and it is the largest funder of critical research, development, engineering to develop products that not only serve the military but are dual use. And there are so many programs across the government now to get outside of Washington and across the country, in the Midwest, the South, in California, the Northeast, to get the Department of War tech partnership offices out there funding startups, funding non-traditional contractors to not only innovate and work with the Department of War and develop what they need, but also there's programs to help them get partnered up and aligned with prime contractors so they can work together. So it's no longer there's a few defense companies and they service the Department of War, they service our military, they service our defense needs. It is now a full spectrum from small companies, from programs that foster a startup culture to getting all those companies aligned with major primes. So the budget comes out of the Department of War, the budget comes out of Washington, and now the programs are there to support all types of tech and startup companies. There is a lot going on, and we could talk about that every week.
You're listening to Ann Leibschutz. She's my guest right now here on More Money. I'm Jake Novak filling in for Stephen Moore. That's your scorecard of everyone who's talking to you right now on the radio, just making sure you know everyone's name. And Ann, really hitting on that. It's an important factor. I remember starting in my high school years, even though that was already more than 10 years after the last moon mission, places where you could go, and in the old days you had to go to the library to do this and see it in an actual book, but now there are websites where you can go where you can see every other technological advancement that you would think has nothing to do with the space program that was made possible because of the scientific discoveries that were made during the space race. I can see the same thing here now, just from the Artemis 2. That'd be great for them to set up a website. Here are the things. Here are some of the things that you might think have nothing to do with the space program that are affecting you in your life. They might actually include motion sickness pills, because we know because of the heat shield problem on the Orion spacecraft, they had to come into the U.S. in re-entry at a steeper angle at a faster speed. I think they told them not to eat anything a few hours before re-entry. That's my guess. But I mean, I'm only half joking there. That's the kind of ancillary, tangential, third or fourth degree of separation type thing that happens when we have these kinds of technological. So, of course, you talked about the job stuff. And I remind people, especially, are folks out there listening, are you fans of the movie, the book, The Hunt for Red October, where we talk about Los Angeles class submarines? We call them that not because they look like LA or they look like Marilyn Monroe. We call them that because they were built in the greater Los Angeles area, specifically Orange County. This is local jobs here. But again, not just in defense tech, as Ann was just talking about. There are so many ancillary third and fourth degree of separation things that happen from this kind of tech. And I wonder if there's a way to invest in that, at least, some way to kind of take a look at it. It would be worth it. Someone putting together those lists and those bullet points would probably get customers among the hedge funds.
Not only is that important, there's a big push to move. There's a big push for this direction. There are programs out of the Department of War and even other federal agencies that prioritize dual use. So not only meeting the needs of the military, meeting the needs of the Department of War civilians, but also, does this also have commercial application? Because when it has a commercial application, it serves everyone else as well. First responders, homeland security, critical infrastructure, medical needs. What serves our warfighters serves our civilians, serves our general population. And when you actually look at SBIR awards and a lot of the funding mechanisms that come out of federal agencies, dual use is often a priority and a requirement. You have to be able to show that you can develop your product and meet multiple markets. So Department of War investments into research, development, science, engineering, small companies, large companies, it is good for the government mission, and it's good for our general population.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, and I can't be just a Pollyanna, and I don't necessarily think this next story is all negative, but it does come out sounding negative, at least in the beginning, and that's something that's very important. And Live Shots, I have to ask you about what I consider to be a stunning, but I checked it and double-checked it, report from the Tech Job Tracker. This is a website, this is a social media account that reports on news in the tech world, the tech job world specifically, and they put out something really stunning at the end of this week. The Stanford computer science majors who are graduating in about a month from Stanford, right now, their job placement rate, meaning the number of graduates, there's 312 of them graduating from this program, considered to be by many the best computer science program in the country. Of those 312 graduates right now, only 5.8% of them, 18 to be specific, have full-time job offers. In 2022, it was 78% of them. This is because of AI, and it doesn't take a genius or Sherlock Holmes, Benedict Cumberbatch, or anyone else, or Basil, whatever his name is, playing Sherlock Holmes to figure this out. Entry-level jobs for even the best computer science grads, very much threatened by this. Now, I am a big believer in the economic reality that when a new technology comes around and kills jobs, it brings them in other places, sometimes spread out, sometimes hard to find. So I am not necessarily saying this is doom and gloom, but for those people who invested the kind of money that it takes to pay for a Stanford degree and on down the line, this is not a good story. And I got to ask you, should we stop telling our kids learn to code? Because it seems like coding is going to be an extinct profession for humans pretty soon.
Well, in the area where I work and with the people and the companies and the professionals with whom I work, there's a phrase that's often repeated, and it's not that AI will replace your job, it's that somebody with good AI skills will replace your job. And that's true, but at the same time, we're in the middle of this. We're in the middle of not the beginning of AI, but the development of these products. And as those products change, there's implications, and we're in the middle of it. We can't see what the end looks like. And tasks that can be automated are the type of tasks that can be can be acquired and can be taken over by AI systems. Things that can be automated, things that follow patterns, repetitive tasks. These include things like data processing and content creation, creative content creation, a basic analysis of text and numbers. All of those things can quickly be automated by application of AI technology. And I never mean to sound, dismissive that people aren't losing their jobs, because those that are doing these repetitive tasks, those will be displaced by this technology. That said, it will evolve into a technology where we can do exponentially more. Those same individuals can do exponentially more. And it's almost an oversimplification, but because in my personal life, I'm teaching math at home, and we have an abacus. So first there was an abacus, then there was a calculator, then there was Excel files, and then there were software. There's software and advanced software computation.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but as an abacus maker, this killed my whole career. I dreamed of being an abacus maker and making millions off of it. And those darn calculators killed me. No, just kidding. Go ahead, Ann. Sorry.
Anyway, but to the point, though, we still use that because it gives somebody a structural understanding of mathematics, which you have to develop to really understand what you're doing. So it's still an important tool. But it didn't displace how many people in our society work in quantitative careers. There's exponentially more people that work in mathematics and finance and quantitative careers compared to if we just had calculators and abacuses. So no, not less people will be employed. At the end of the process, when the tools are developed, more people will be employed, more will get done faster, and it'll be greater impact. And at the same time, it shouldn't overshadow the fact that in the middle of this, there are people whose repetitive tasks are being replaced by AI technology, but at some point they will be elevated to a greater task as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's important. Hey, Ann Leibschutz, we have just about a minute left. I do want to talk about this other AI story. We got this report in the middle of the week or end of the week that both Scott Bessent and apparently the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, and some other people in the Trump administration briefed the major banks here in New York about this Anthropic AI program that definitely posed some kind of a threat that Anthropic itself took offline. Sounds like the plot of the Terminator. Should we be worried about this kind of stuff? And it sounds like we were worried enough to tell the banks not to get into a panic about it.
Well, AI is complicated technology, and recognize we have only a brief moment left. It is complex technology, and a lot goes into it. And Mythos was trained and designed successfully to take on cybersecurity tasks. And based upon what we know, I do think that there's something very important, that equally important to developing things that can perform hacking and cybersecurity exploitation, we need to also develop technology that can, at an equal pace, fix vulnerabilities as fast as AI tools can find them.
That's a good point. Well, Ann Leibschutz, as you can hear, everyone, she's really someone who's got her finger on the pulse of a lot of this tech stuff. We didn't even really get into all the legal nitty-gritty. That's another area of expertise. She's also a competitive swimmer, or was, so she knows a lot about a lot of things, and she probably knows how to do it with a little bit of that water that gets in your ear. I mean, if you could do all that with that, that's pretty impressive. Ann Leibschutz, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be hearing from you, I'm sure, a lot more in the future. And look, folks, again, it's not all bad news, but even if it were some other real bad news this week, don't forget, we just rescued one guy in a country of 93 million people in a mountainous range thanks to tech. And we also just had a successful moon mission thanks to tech. And there's going to be a lot of jobs and a lot of improvements in our lives from both. Ann, thank you so much. We're going to be right back on the Stephen Moore Show. Going to take your calls, 800-848-9222. I'm also going to tell you something really interesting that Ford did. They're smart over there in Detroit sometimes. I'll be right back.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
800-848-9222 is the number to call. Love to hear some of your thoughts on some of the topics we've been talking about, or another financial topic that you'd like to get to. Before I get to a caller or two, I'd like to talk about this story out of Ford Motor Company, because I think that Ford conducted a little bit of a master class on when to talk and when not to talk when your company is thrust into the spotlight. Now, earlier this week, the Wall Street Journal did an exclusive story about how Ford and some of the other Detroit auto companies, but mostly Ford, was strongly lobbying and kvetching and doing all kinds of stuff like this with the Trump administration to try to get tariff relief because, as you may remember, or may not, maybe not, because the mainstream media doesn't cover enough important stories in this country. We had actually an important story last year where 2 fires in short order hit the Novelis aluminum plant in Oswego, New York, back to back. This is an aluminum plant that supplies this critical sheet aluminum metal for the Ford F-150. For those of you who don't know about Ford and the F-150 pickup, probably because you live in some urban area where you don't know about it, it's the number one vehicle sold in this country for 40 years running. Maybe in 2024, the RAV4, the Toyota RAV4 outsold it. We'll never know for sure because both sides are disputing it, but it's basically the king. So if Ford has problems with the F-150, they're sunk. Now, luckily for Ford, on one hand, Novelis is an international company with actual owners in Asia. So they were able to move that production overseas. So they still got the aluminum they needed to make the Ford F-150. Supply still coming. But because that aluminum was coming from overseas now and not Oswego, New York, I know a lot of you think Oswego, New York is a foreign country, but it isn't. They had to pay more for it because it was tariffed. So Ford went to the administration, according to the Wall Street Journal, and said, hey, love you, Don. Love you, Donald Trump. Love you, all you guys. Love your tariff policies. But can we get a special exemption because of this fire? This isn't like, this is an emergency situation. And the Wall Street Journal reporting that this was really Ford banging on the door, begging, kvetching, making a lot of calls, sending a lot of emojis. No, I don't know what they were doing, but they were pushing it. Now, Ford, throughout this day or so that report was just out there, said nothing. Some people at the company probably said, oh, here's our chance. We'll go in front of the cameras and say, yeah, we're not really all against the tariffs. We can see how this is good for the American worker in some places, but we had this fire, and they could have gotten their spokesperson, male or female, with the biggest eyes and do a little anime. And I'm half kidding, but they could have done that. Instead, they stayed quiet long enough for someone in the administration to tell the Wall Street Journal about 24 hours later that, no, Ford isn't bothering us with this. They might have said one thing. They're not giving us a hard time over this. And that is the way to handle it. You don't want to start up fighting. And this is true of Democrat presidents, Democrat administrations also. This isn't just, how to deal with Donald Trump 101. I'm not doing that. Okay? I'm not doing that. What I am doing is telling you about how companies can sometimes do it right. I am a big fan of not only showing when a company does something wrong from a business standpoint and learning from it, but when a company does something right. Being in the media business for all these years, my entire adult life, if you know me long enough, you know that I'll end up telling you the story about how Tylenol, Johnson & Johnson owning it at that time before they spun it off to another company recently, the way that Johnson & Johnson handled the Tylenol crisis in 1982, when somebody, and by the way, this is still an unsolved case, no one has been jailed for this. In 1982, someone was putting cyanide into Tylenol bottles, mostly in the Illinois area. People died. And what did Johnson & Johnson do? Did they say, this is just a couple of stores, they'll get them, we didn't do it, we take no responsibility? No. They immediately made the decision to pull every single bottle of Tylenol off of every shelf in the entire world. And yes, they lost money because of that for a while. But in the long run, their reputation was saved. People looked at that company and said, wow, these guys aren't messing around. They actually might care about me. So when a company does a good job of public relations and talking or not talking, which is what Ford did, I like to show it. Now, I don't know if this is related to this news or not, but Ford shares were up 5% last week. And that's despite the fact that they were almost down by a full percent on Friday. So they would have been up 6%. They had a really nice week. So, folks, understand this is really important to talk about. It's important to understand how companies respond to things, whether you do respond to things. Yeah, I've been accused of stuff in the past, and almost every single time, it's ridiculous. I could just throw cold water on it. Once or twice, I may push back on it, but a lot of times I follow the rule of, you know what, why would I amplify this ridiculous accusation or comment? And, and I'm just a guy. Forget about it being a big company. They get accused of stuff all the time. The next time you're at a family gathering, mention McDonald's and you hear 75 conspiracy theories about McDonald's or Chipotle or Corona. You hear about it all the time. Should they respond to every one of them? Probably not. All right, Russ in White Plains, and you're interested in this whole betting market thing that I was talking about before. What do you got, Russ?
Well, yeah, I want to ask you about insider trading at the Pentagon and what would be the penalty for that kind of blood money. But, Jake, one thing about history, because I know you'd like to be right on the history, you mentioned when I spoke about the USS Vincennes, which shot down in 1988, the airliner 655 Iran Air killing 290 innocents, you said it was an accident, and we apologize. But, in fact, I looked into it, and George H.W. Bush gave the captain of that ship a medal and said he would never apologize for the military. So I know you want to be correct on that.
But
Jake,
Ronald Reagan was president at the time that happened. So whatever George H.W. Bush did in the subsequent years, or that's a different story. And I don't think he gave him a medal for shooting down the Vincennes. Thank you, Russ, for that call. Look, that's a good question that you asked before about people in the Pentagon and if they're betting. And right now, that's the problem, Russ. We don't have specific rules now. Because it is the Pentagon and the military, and you don't have the kind of human rights and HR rights that you have at a company. And by the way, if you are working at a company and you think HR is your friend, they're not. They're not there for you. Just so you know. But at least you do have some understanding of your workers' rights. You don't have all that. In the military, you sign away a lot of your rights when you go into the military. Don't get to wear your hair the way you want to wear it. Don't get to say I'm sleeping in today. That's the whole point. So your commanding officer could tell you, hey, I saw that you bet on Kalshi and I'm going to put you in the brig, or we'll put you through a court martial. But that's the problem. We don't have specific rules yet that I know of that should be publicized. I would like to see the Secretary of War come out with this. Now, I'd also like to see the full text of the email that the White House sent on March 24th, according to a number of sources, to everyone who works at the White House and in other parts of the Trump administration, telling them not to bet on Polymarket and with Kalshi and doing all those kinds of things because they have insider information sometimes, just like a corporate CEO. The CEO of Ford, if he knows that the Ford F-150 sales are going to be crap for a month, can't go and sell off his stock based on that insider information. He will go to jail for that. We have a specific law about that. But the same CEO of Ford could presumably bet on one of these Polymarket betting sites that they're going to have a bad week in the stock market and make a lot of money. And while that would be incredibly unethical, and if I were on the board of Ford, I'd remove the guy, Jim Farley, if he ever did that. He's not a bad Ford CEO as Ford CEOs go, by the way. I don't know if he could bring him up on criminal charges. That's why we're in this little hazy. We're in a really hazy place with this, folks. What's the rule? I don't know. And the markets were the first to raise a red flag about this, investors on Wall Street, because of all that insider information stuff that I was talking about. But now with the Iran war, we're seeing now, because people were betting on the day that we would find that other downed crew member of the F-15, and they had to pull it because they were getting a lot of criticism. Now, because of the Iran war, we're also getting the rest of the country is waking up to the other things that you can bet on these sites and how there could be real corruption here. And it isn't just necessarily a soldier in the field or a low-level person. It could be the defense secretary, the secretary of war, as we call it now. It could be one of his staffers. This isn't good. This isn't good. Now, I know that people are going to bet on things. If you want to do that with your friends from college on a chat board and your friend, that's fine. You're going to do that. Go ahead and have fun with that. You can get a commissioner like you get for your fantasy football league. That's all cool. Okay. But if you're in a government position, if you're in a position in a company, that's a tough sell for me. And I promise you I'm not a prude. I understand how that goes. I understand people are going to bet on sports. I understand people are going to bet on the numbers. I don't like lotteries and I don't like sports betting, but I am not here to say let's make it all illegal. But I will say that the scale of some of these things now is just out of control. There's no way there isn't corruption. I'm not an idiot, and neither are you. All right, I'm going to come back with more of your calls. The number to call is 800-848-9222. I'm Jake Novak filling in for Steve Moore. Going to have more of your calls as we close out the program.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And I'm Jake Novak filling in for Steve Moore. I'm not a leading economist. I'd like to be. I keep falling back to the pack in the economists. Only half kidding. I have been a political and economic analyst for a long time, and it's really an honor to fill in for Steve, who has been a guest on many of the programs I either produced or hosted over the years. So it all comes full circle. John in New Jersey. You want to talk about how the world doesn't need Iran's oil. I agree with you. What do you got to say, John?
I didn't say that. What I'm saying is, why is it Donald Trump, who I love dearly, says that we have so much oil and natural gas in our country, and we don't actually need Iran's oil, whatever that may mean. But nevertheless, why is our prices at the gas pump so high?
That's a good question.
Country?
That's a good question because, the price of oil and then subsequently gasoline, because that's the building block for the price of gasoline and eventually gets refined and things like that. It's a world set price. So in other words, the world supply affects our prices here. Why? Because the people who produce the oil here in the United States, American companies and in this part of the hemisphere, have the right to sell that oil anywhere they want. Now, where are they going to sell it? If the price of oil is $125 a barrel overseas and $90 here or less than that here, where are they going to sell it? Now, someone could say, well, stop those companies from being allowed. We can't let them export the oil because otherwise we have high prices here. Now, in a time of war, that makes a little bit of sense. We don't want to be out of supply and that kind of thing. But other than actual war, I mean, I know we're technically at war with Iran, but I mean a war where we really need massive amounts of fuel for our war machine. That's not going to work. Let's talk about basic economics. If you tell a producer you can't sell your product, which by the way, oil is a pain in the neck to produce. It's a miracle of science that we actually get that stuff out of the ground and the ocean floor. And if you tell them, you know what, I know you can get a lot of more money for that product across the street, but you can't. Sorry, you can't sell it. Not allowed. Well, what are they going to do? They're going to stop producing it because it's just not worth it for them to continue to sell it at these lower prices, or they will produce less. It's as simple as that. And so the prices go up because they can sell it anywhere they want. They can pay the extra money to ship it overseas if it makes sense for them, and they make money at even with that added cost. It is a world price. You can't get around that. If you try to get around that with price controls, you will make it even worse because then supply will go down. Then even the domestic producers will stop producing as much and they'll go and work in something else. They'll invest in a porn site or something. I'm half kidding, but you get my point. It's just easier. So that's why. And we are paying more, and it does stink. I said at the top of the show, it stinks that we're paying $1.15 and 15 cents more national average for a gallon of gas than we were the day before the war. I hate that. However, even if you don't adjust for inflation, we're still 88 cents a gallon cheaper than we were in the summer of 2022. If you do adjust for inflation, we're $1.50 or more or less per gallon than we were in the summer of 2022. And we are starting to see gasoline prices, believe it or not, go down. We're at $4.13. We got up to $4.16 a couple of days ago. Is it going to continue to go down? I sure hope so. We have had a precipitous drop in the price of oil, which will, of course, help the price of gasoline go down. So let's hope that we get into that direction. Absolutely. But the problem is the economy, as I said at the top of the show, it's a living thing. And anything that you do to try to control it, I'm going to channel Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park. You can try to stop nature, but nature finds a way. That's how it goes. And nature, the economy will find a way. If someone's willing to pay $125 a barrel in country A, and your country says, I know you're making a lot of oil here, Joe, but you can't sell it for any more than 60, then believe me, Joe's going to find a way, or Joe will go into another business. That's how it goes. Is it fair? I don't know, but at least it's natural, and it's something that I can sort of get an idea about. Linda on Long Island, You want to talk about weight loss drugs, and before you think that this isn't an economic story, boy, are you wrong, because Linda is right. I bet she knows the economic impact of all this. Go ahead, Linda.
I love Steve, and you're doing a good job. Okay, the weight loss drugs, I don't need it, so it's not personal, but it was announced they're making, did they say billions?
Mm-hmm.
They're making so much money on these, they'll never really check it out. A little bit is coming out, a little bit at a time now, about the side effects, a little bit more, it's a little thing. Then it's a little more serious. All these people are buying it. That's not necessary.
Mm.
If somebody has a little bit of weight on, it's a lot better to be alive than take a risk on something like this. And no one's talking about, it's getting more and more. They're making so much money. Oh, new ones are just coming out.
Linda, I got even worse.
Talk about it.
I have even worse news for you on this front, because if you remember before COVID, the big focus, the big push in pharma, and they haven't given up these things, but it is no longer the major focus in pharma anymore. The big focus was on drugs that would get for cancer, vaccines for cancer, drugs the holy grail for the drug, and it still is in some ways for the pharma industry, was Alzheimer's, because it is so pervasive. And now they got into all kinds of COVID and flu stuff, which we know that was very problematic, to say the least. Problematic from a health standpoint, problematic from a political standpoint, problematic culturally. It's created a whole cultural divide in this country that's really hard for us to get over. And now they're so focused on the quick money. You're right. The billions they keep making on these weight loss drugs. Now, there are a lot of people who have severe obesity, and it's absolutely worth the risks of the side effects for these people, because they have a much bigger problem with their severe obesity. But as you mentioned, Linda, and you're right on the money, there are some people who have a very small issue with their weight, or maybe you don't even have an issue with their weight at all. Maybe they're anorexic. Maybe they're narcissistic. They want to be as perfect as they possibly be. And the side effects, which are documented, are not worth it for them. But they're doing it anyway. And if they're wealthy, they're going to get those drugs anyway. And we are bending over backwards for something where, you're right, we're finding out more of these side effects. But here are the things that we've already known from the beginning about these drugs, and this is not in dispute. First of all, you can't get off of them and continue to hope to stay at that weight. You will gain usually all the weight back, or a significant amount of it back. So you're stuck with it. Even the people who I think are very justified in taking it, and there are a lot of people who are justified. And no, again, I am not being a school marm. I'm not being a scold. I understand that for some people, just saying willpower and exercise doesn't work for them. And I am not saying that. Some people, it doesn't work for them. And I do have not only sympathy, but an understanding of that. I get it. But for a lot of people taking these drugs, because we're seeing it at the scale, we're not talking about a few people here and there. The scale of people on these drugs is out of control. And there's no way there isn't a significant percentage of people taking these drugs who are now in a higher risk factor than they were for any extra pounds they may have had, compared to the side effects that they're going to be suffering with these drugs. That's it. That to me is incredibly, incredibly worrisome. Rich, I've only got like a minute left, but I want to get your Godfather analogy with the Strait of Hormuz. I can't wait. My favorite, the best American movie of all time. Rich, what do you got to say?
Yes, in the scene where Vito Corleone is talking to the heads of the 5 families, and he's advocating the safe return for Michael to America.
Yes.
He says if he should be found hung in his cell or struck by a bolt of lightning, then I'm gonna hold people responsible in this room. You can be sure the Trump administration is telling the Iranian regime, if so much of a scratch is on those tankers going through the Strait of Hormuz, you're going to be held responsible, and you can kiss your oil fields goodbye.
Rich from Westchester, good job of analogies from movies is a absolute cottage industry for me as a newsman. Whether I was producing shows or on camera or on the mic, I like to take movie clips to help elucidate a story. The crew behind the glass here knows that. I just used a Clint Eastwood from the movie Magnum Force, by the way, about San Quentin. So good job. Very true. I'm willing to forgive, but if something should happen to my son, it should be found hanged in the cell. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to do the Marlon Brando, but very good analogy. And that would be smart for the Trump administration to say that. Have they said something like that? I'm not sure, but they should. All right, I'm Jake Novak. I've been filling in for Steve Moore on this beautiful Saturday on More Money. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for calling in and listening. I know I wasn't the regular man today. I appreciate it. I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks for listening to More Money with Steve Moore. You can hear More Money with Steve Moore Saturday afternoons at 1. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?